John Gramps Matthews had always been a man of quiet reputation. At 68, his hair was more salt than pepper, and his back bore the subtle stoop of age, yet his eyes remained sharp, alert, and calculating. His neighbors often saw him walking across the Nevada desert toward the small private range he had maintained for decades, dragging a battered case that carried his prized Barrett .50 sniper rifle. To the casual observer, he was an old man playing at the hobby of sharpshooting, but those who knew his past understood that Gramps was a legend, someone who had once walked the line between life and death with nothing more than patience, precision, and a rifle. The desert sun rose low over the horizon, painting the landscape in pale gold and long shadows. Gramps adjusted his cap, shielding his eyes, and surveyed the range. Targets had been placed at distances that would challenge even the most seasoned marksman. Steel plates glinting at nearly impossible ranges, white circles faint in the morning heat. He knelt by his equipment, his movements slow but precise. Each round he selected was inspected, weighed, and placed in meticulous order. Every bolt and screw of his Barrett rifle was examined, polished, and tightened. To anyone else, this was overkill, an old man fussing with a weapon. To Gramps, it was ritual. Preparation, patience, and respect for the craft, these were the things that separated the great from the ordinary. Word had spread through the military circles and local shooting communities that a German sniper delegation was visiting the range for a joint international exercise. Rumors of their advanced rifles, precision training, and unparalleled skill traveled faster than the Nevada wind. Gramps, of course, had heard the whispers, though he never allowed himself to get distracted by what others said. He was not one to boast or seek attention. He had long since learned that skill spoke louder than words. Yet he could not deny a flicker of curiosity. How skilled were these German marksmen? And, more importantly, would they recognize true expertise when they saw it? When the Germans arrived, their sleek, modern rifles glinted in the sunlight. They moved with the confident precision of young men trained in elite programs, their uniforms pristine, their postures disciplined. They laughed as they noticed Gramps, an elderly man, slowly setting up his weapons with deliberate care. "Look at Grandpa," one of them whispered in accented English. "Does he even know how to shoot that thing?" Another snickered. They thought they had already won before a single shot was fired. The arrogance in their laughter was palpable, a wall Gramps would have to silently break. He didn't respond. Words were unnecessary. Instead, he set his scope, measured the wind, and checked the mirage over the desert. Every movement was calculated, every breath controlled. To an outsider, he might have seemed fragile, an anachronism standing among modern warriors. But within him was a calm storm of experience, honed over decades of missions where hesitation could mean death. Gramps had learned long ago that the world did not care for age, it cared for results. And he had results that the Germans could not imagine. Gramps' first action was methodical. He placed a spotting scope on a tripod and scanned the far targets, noting subtle shifts in wind and heat shimmer. He adjusted his rifle's bipod and seated himself comfortably, making minor adjustments to ensure stability. Every detail mattered. In the military, he had learned to trust nothing but his calculations and instincts. The Germans continued their mocking, oblivious to the careful preparation that was unfolding. They were confident, sure that the old man was simply a relic of a bygone era, incapable of matching their precision. Around him, the desert was alive with subtle movement. A lizard scuttled across the sand, birds circled lazily overhead, and the faint hum of wind whispered through the rocks. Gramps took all of this into account. He measured the distance to the furthest steel plate, calculated the drop of the .50 caliber round over that range, and accounted for the atmospheric conditions. Each factor could change a shot from perfect to useless. He allowed himself a small smile, invisible to the Germans. As he thought of all the impossible shots he had made in his life missions in dense forests, snowy mountains, and urban landscapes where the stakes were far higher than any mock exercise, Gramps' hands were steady, despite the years. He lifted the Barrett rifle, its weight familiar and reassuring. He ran through the motions, adjusting the scope, checking the chamber, ensuring that every component functioned flawlessly. This was ritual, meditation, and preparation all at once. The Germans continued their banter, dismissive and loud, yet he paid no attention. Mockery was easy when one had not faced real danger. Skill, however, was earned through patience, practice, and experience. Gramps had enough of all three to put even the youngest snipers to shame. Nearby, a few trainers and observers watched with curiosity. They knew of Gramps' reputation, an old Army sniper who had long since retired but never lost his edge. They exchanged glances, some skeptical, some quietly hopeful. Could he truly match these elite German marksmen? The thought alone sent a ripple of anticipation through the range. This was not just about hitting targets. It was about respect, legacy, and the silent proof that age and wisdom still held power in a world obsessed with youth and technology. Gramps finally rested his rifle, closing his eyes for a moment to focus. He felt the desert, the wind, and the heat shimmer as if they were extensions of his own senses. This was not arrogance, it was connection. He remembered training in Europe decades ago, missions that required patience and nerves of steel, where one wrong calculation could cost lives. Those lessons had never left him. Today, the German snipers thought they mocked a harmless old man, but he had walked paths they could not imagine, and his mind had memorized lessons that technology alone could never teach. As the Germans prepared their first demonstration, laughter still echoing across the sand, Gramps loaded a single round into his rifle. He adjusted the scope, checked the wind again, and exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar weight of experience settle over him like a cloak. This was his world, and though they mocked him, he was not intimidated. He knew what he could do. Age had brought wisdom, and wisdom, he thought, often outweighed youth. The stage was set. The mockery would not last long. For Gramps, this was not about revenge, nor about proving something to the Germans or the observers. It was about mastery, focus, and the quiet satisfaction that came from doing something perfectly when others doubted your ability. He had long since learned that results speak louder than words, and soon, very soon, the desert would bear witness to that truth. He adjusted the rifle one last time, fingers brushing the worn metal lovingly, and prepared to show that some things skill, precision, and experience never fade, no matter the years. The German delegation moved with confidence, every step precise, every gesture deliberate. Their rifles gleamed in the morning sun, high-tech optics reflecting the desert landscape. The youngest of the group, barely in his 20s, smirked as he glanced at Gramps. "Do you really think that old man can do anything here?" he asked, voice tinged with amusement and disbelief. His companions laughed, the sound harsh against the quiet hum of the desert wind. They were convinced that experience, age, and patience had no place in modern sniping. Technology and youth, they believed, were everything. Gramps, seated cross-legged behind his Barrett .50, paid them no attention. His fingers ran lightly over the stock, polishing, adjusting, and ensuring everything was flawless. Every movement was deliberate, every detail important. To him, this was more than a competition. It was a demonstration of a lifetime of skill distilled into precise, measured actions. He inspected his ammunition, noting the weight and markings on each round. His mind, honed by decades of service, ran through complex calculations of trajectory, wind, temperature, and even the mirage patterns over the distant desert. The Germans began their display. One young sniper fired, the bullet striking a steel plate nearly a kilometer away with uncanny accuracy. Another followed, and then another, each shot met with applause and laughter from the group. They were proud, confident, and most importantly, arrogant. Mocking Gramps became almost a ritual. They called out taunts and nicknames: Grandpa Sniper, Old Timer, and Do you need a chair? Expecting him to flinch or respond. But Gramps remained silent, focused, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to their brash energy. Nearby, trainers and observers exchanged quiet whispers. "I've seen him in action before," one murmured, eyeing the old man. "If he gets the wind and elevation right, he could hit anything the kid just nailed." Another shook his head, doubtful. "He's 80 years old in skill, maybe. But those Germans' modern rifles, rapid calculations, youth, they'll overwhelm him." Yet even in doubt, there was curiosity. Could decades of experience really overcome the technological edge and sheer speed of these highly trained young snipers? Gramps, unmoved by their laughter, began his own methodical process. He set his spotting scope, scanning the distant range, noting the subtle shimmer of the heat over the desert floor. Every plate, every target, every possible disturbance in the air was analyzed. He adjusted his scope carefully, calculating the exact point of aim required for a perfect shot over extreme distance. Each movement was deliberate, measured, almost ceremonial. To an outsider, it might appear slow or outdated, but Gramps knew the power of patience and preparation. Speed without precision was useless. Haste would ruin everything. The Germans grew impatient. One of them stepped closer, peering at the old man's warm rifle. "You really trust that relic?" he asked, smirking. Gramps did not respond. His focus remained absolute, his hands steady. Years of training and real combat missions had taught him that the mind must be sharper than the eye, the strategy stronger than arrogance. The Germans' modern rifles, fancy optics, and youthful energy meant little against decades of experience applied with precision. Gramps took a deep breath and considered the variables: wind direction, velocity, mirage, bullet drop, and even the faint vibrations of the desert floor. He ran a mental simulation, imagining each stage of the shot, from trigger pull to bullet impact. Every step was rehearsed, every calculation double-checked in his mind. Experience gave him something the Germans did not yet realize: the ability to see the invisible patterns of nature, to predict conditions that could ruin a shot before they happened. The Germans continued to mock, but subtle signs of doubt began creeping into their expressions. The first plate had been struck easily, yes, but this next one over 1,500 meters away was almost impossible. The wind over that distance was unpredictable, shifting subtly every few seconds. Heat shimmer distorted vision and optics alike. Yet Gramps worked patiently, aligning his scope, adjusting for every tiny factor. The younger snipers exchanged nervous glances. Confidence alone would not carry them over such distance. A local observer, a retired army instructor, watched intently. "Look at his posture," he whispered. "Calm, relaxed, yet every movement deliberate. He's not reacting, he's calculating. That's the mark of someone who's done this hundreds, maybe thousands of times." Another trainer nodded, impressed despite himself. He could hit the target from here blindfolded if he had to. Experience like that doesn't come from youth or technology. It comes from life, from combat, from countless hours perfecting the craft. Gramps finally adjusted his position. Knees tucked, body angled perfectly for stability. He tested the trigger, felt the familiar resistance, and exhaled slowly. The Germans, noticing his actions, laughed louder, certain that old age would betray him. They had seen no shot yet, but they were already convinced he would fail. Pride blinded them to the subtle signs of mastery, the steady rhythm of Gramps' breathing, the calm gleam in his eyes, and the meticulous preparation It left nothing to chance. The tension on the range grew. The Germans were showing off, and the crowd of observers leaned forward in anticipation. Gramps, however, did not rush. He was in no hurry. To him, this was a familiar dance. Patience first, precision second, results last. He knew that once he committed to the shot, all calculations had to be perfect, all conditions accounted for. One misstep, one miscalculation, and the opportunity would be lost. But he was confident. He had walked this path before, when stakes were life and death. Today, it was reputation and pride, but the principle was the same. Gramps' hand rested lightly on the rifle, eyes scanning every detail, measuring, calculating, predicting. The Germans, still smirking, failed to notice the subtle changes in the air, the faint wind shift that could alter their perfect shots. They assumed technology alone guaranteed success. Gramps knew otherwise. He adjusted his scope one final time, nodding to himself almost imperceptibly. The stage was set. The challenge was ready. And soon, very soon, the laughter of the arrogant would meet the quiet force of experience. The desert air shimmered with heat as Gramps settled into position, his Barrett .50 resting comfortably on its bipod. The German snipers continued their display, calling out jokes and taunts that cut across the range like sharp bullets themselves. "Aim carefully, Grandpa," one said with a smirk. "Don't fall asleep while loading your rifle." The others laughed, confident that this old man, with his worn rifle and deliberate movements, could never match their speed or accuracy. They were young, trained, and armed with modern technology, but they had not accounted for decades of honed experience. Gramps ignored the laughter. Each breath was controlled, each adjustment precise. He had been here before, not this range. Not these Germans, but in situations far more perilous, where patience and focus determined life or death. Every calculation ran through his mind. Distance, wind, mirage, bullet trajectory, humidity. He had performed these mental exercises thousands of times, on battlefields and in training, often with lives depending on the result. This was merely another target, though it carried pride and reputation instead of mortality. With a final adjustment to the scope, Gramps exhaled slowly and took the first shot. The bullet sailed through the air, cutting a path over the desert with silent elegance. For a heartbeat, everything seemed still. The Germans leaned forward, expecting the shot to falter. They laughed at what they presumed would be a miss, already celebrating their inevitable superiority. But then, the bullet grazed the edge of the distant steel plate close, but not perfect. A tiny victory for skill, but not enough to silence mockery. The laughter grew louder. "See, even Grandpa misses," one of the Germans shouted, shaking his head. The others joined in, cheering, slapping their rifles with self-satisfied pride. They were confident, certain that they had outclassed the old man. Yet behind the laughter, some unease began to creep in. The bullet hadn't missed completely. It had grazed the target, and the precision required to even come that close was far beyond what most snipers could achieve at that range. But arrogance made them blind. They mocked the old man without understanding the depth of his skill. Gramps remained calm. Sweat beaded his forehead, but his hands were steady. He recalled younger days' long-range missions, countless hours of training in wind, rain, and snow. He remembered nights in dense forests where one miscalculation could end in disaster. He had faced enemies far more dangerous than mocking snipers. The German laughter was meaningless compared to the lessons etched into his mind by decades of experience. He adjusted his position slightly, checked his wind calculation, and made minor tweaks to his scope, preparing for the second attempt. Nearby observers began to take notice. Trainers whispered quietly, impressed despite themselves. "Look at his technique," one murmured. "He's not reacting, he's analyzing." That's a veteran at work. Another trainer shook his head, still doubtful but captivated. Those Germans don't realize how close that first shot was. If he corrects for the mirage and wind shift, he could do something incredible. The tension on the range thickened. The audience of observers now watched in rapt silence, curiosity replacing derision. The Germans, meanwhile, were growing restless. Confidence was shifting subtly to impatience. One of them stepped closer to the old man, inspecting his worn rifle. "You really think you can hit that again?" he asked, voice dripping with scorn. Gramps did not respond. Words were unnecessary. He had learned that action spoke louder than speech, that skill revealed itself in results, not boasting. The young sniper's arrogance only fueled Gramps' focus. Gramps took a moment, letting his mind run through every factor once more. Distance, over 1,500 meters. Wind, subtle shift to the left at 3.5 meters per second. Mirage, heat waves rising over the desert floor creating slight visual distortion. He calculated bullet drop, factoring in air density, temperature, and humidity. Every detail was a variable in a complex equation that his mind could solve faster than most snipers could think. Patience, he knew, was his greatest ally. Haste would ruin everything. He exhaled slowly, centering his breathing with the rhythm of the desert. A faint breeze shifted across the sand, altering the path of the bullet slightly. Gramps noted it, adjusted his aim, and remained motionless, every fiber of his being focused. The Germans continued their mocking, unaware that their confidence was fragile. Their youth and technology gave them speed, but not the understanding that only experience could teach. Then, with steady hands, Gramps took the second shot. The rifle's recoil was absorbed with practiced ease. The bullet flew over the desert, cutting through the heat shimmer with precision. Observers squinted, following the trajectory. Time seemed to stretch as the projectile arced gracefully toward the distant steel plate. The Germans leaned forward, expecting another near miss. The bullet struck, not merely grazing the edge, but connecting solidly with the center of the target. Silence fell. The mockery stopped abruptly. Shock registered on the Germans' faces. Their eyes widened in disbelief. "Did he?" one muttered, unable to finish the sentence. The laughter had evaporated, replaced by stunned admiration. Gramps lowered the rifle calmly, not gloating, not celebrating. He simply knew his work had spoken for itself. The target, now struck squarely, demonstrated a level of skill and precision that even the most advanced rifles and young reflexes could not guarantee without years of experience guiding the hand. The crowd of observers erupted quietly in applause, some murmuring in awe. "He's done it," one trainer said softly, shaking his head. "That's decades of experience right there. No young sniper could have done that without him showing them exactly how." Delta Force operatives, hidden among the spectators, exchanged knowing glances. They had recognized his skill from the first shot and knew that clearing his path for the final, impossible target could result in a legendary demonstration. The Germans, now humbled but still unsure how to react, approached cautiously. The youngest member, the one who had mocked Gramps the most, swallowed hard. His mind raced to understand how the old man, slow-moving and seemingly fragile, could outperform them at long range. Pride battled with awe. He had never seen such precision, delivered with calm patience. Technology alone could not explain it. They had underestimated the value of experience, the wisdom of decades spent perfecting one's craft. Gramps did not gloat or speak. He simply cleaned his rifle, checking the alignment once more, preparing for the final shot, the one that would test his mastery fully. The desert was silent, except for the wind and the faint shuffling of feet. All eyes were on him now. The Germans had stopped mocking. The crowd was leaning in, waiting. Even the instructors who had doubted him were now leaning forward, eager to witness what came next. The tension was palpable. Gramps' mind worked quickly yet methodically, calculating, anticipating, and preparing. The German's confidence had faltered, replaced by curiosity and unease. The first shot had been a warning, the second a demonstration. But the ultimate challenge, the shot that seemed impossible, even to seasoned marksmen, was still ahead. And Gramps, calm and focused, knew that it would be his masterpiece. He adjusted his scope one final time, took a deep breath, and waited for the moment to commit. The stage was set for a confrontation between youthful arrogance and the quiet mastery of experience. The desert stretched endlessly under the high sun, shimmering with heat as Gramps prepared for the next round of shots. Observers had gone quiet after his impressive demonstration. The German snipers were no longer laughing, though their disbelief had yet to turn into respect. Delta Force operatives, scattered subtly among the range, had been watching from the first moments. Their eyes, trained to detect even the smallest sign of skill, had locked on to Gramps the moment he had rested his Barrett .50 on the bipod. They recognized the precision, the calm, and the decades of experience guiding every movement. Major Tom Bennett, a Delta Force sniper team leader, leaned slightly forward, signaling to his team without words. "That man," he whispered to the operative beside him, "has the perfect combination of skill, patience, and experience. He's calculating everything before he even breathes. If we let him take the final shot without assistance, it might be incredible, but clearing his path and providing subtle guidance? That could be legendary." The team, positioned discreetly across the range, began to relay subtle environmental data, shifting communication into nearly invisible signals. A hand tilt here, a light flash there when corrections, mirage calculations, and subtle bullet trajectory notes. Gramps, focused entirely on his rifle and target, remained unaware of the assistance being offered. This was how Delta Force operated, supporting without interfering, providing the edge only when it was truly necessary. The German snipers continued to move and joke, unaware that their confidence was about to be shattered by experience and some unseen professional guidance. Gramps methodically examined the range again. Over 1,500 meters to the final target, a steel plate mounted atop a small hill, completely exposed to the desert winds. He took note of the heat shimmer, the direction of the breeze, and the dry, low-pressure air. Every element could alter the bullet's path over such distance. He adjusted his scope minutely, aligning crosshairs with careful precision. Even minor errors would make the difference between success and failure. He was aware that all eyes were upon him, but he paid them no mind. The crowd, the Germans, the observers, they were irrelevant. Only the rifle, the target, and the calculations mattered. The Germans, growing increasingly restless, began to murmur among themselves. The arrogance that had marked the first shots was fading, replaced with caution and curiosity. One of them, who had mocked Gramps most severely, stepped closer to the older man, his rifle dangling in his hands. "How can he?" he muttered, stopping mid-sentence. He could not believe how methodical, calm, and focused the man was. They had relied on speed, training, and technology, but here was a veteran whose entire life had been dedicated to perfecting this craft. Delta Force operatives noted subtle shifts in the wind. A slight gust to the left, barely perceptible to the naked eye, could alter the bullet trajectory. They signaled to each other, quietly moving into positions where they could provide guidance without being seen. Their goal was simple: to ensure Gramps' final, legendary shot would have the best possible chance of success. But even with their assistance, they knew it was his skill and experience that would truly carry the day. Technology alone could not replicate decades of practice under real-life combat conditions. Gramps took a deep breath, closing his eyes momentarily. He recalled training exercises in Europe decades ago, missions where he had lain in freezing forests for hours, calculating wind, humidity, and distance before taking a single shot. Lives had depended on his accuracy, and the lessons from those days had never left him. He was aware that this final target would be his ultimate test, one that could cement his reputation beyond local legend. Yet he remained calm, methodical, and deliberate. Preparation was everything. The observers leaned forward, sensing the growing tension. Even the German snipers, though trying to hide it, were watching closely, aware that this was no ordinary old man they faced. Their prior arrogance had faded. Curiosity and a hint of unease replaced it. Could he really hit such a distant target with a single shot under these conditions? The thought was almost inconceivable, yet everything Gramps had done so far suggested he was not just capable, he might be unstoppable. Delta Force's subtle guidance was flowing seamlessly. One operative raised a hand, signaling a slight adjustment in wind direction. Another flashed a reflection from a small mirror, indicating mirage patterns shifting across the heat-hazed desert. Gramps, absorbed entirely in his calculations, adapted instinctively. His mind, honed by decades of experience, could process environmental changes faster than most could speak. This was mastery, the blending of instinct, knowledge, and patience into perfect execution. Gramps adjusted his rifle again, sighting the distant steel plate. The heat shimmer created distortions, yet his experience allowed him to see through the optical illusions. Every variable was accounted for: wind, bullet drop, humidity, air density, and even the subtle vibration of the ground from distant movements. He exhaled slowly, allowing his body to align with the rhythm of his mind. Years of practice had taught him that perfection was not rushed. Haste was the enemy of accuracy. The German snipers shifted uneasily. Their modern rifles and advanced optics could not compensate for lack of patience and experience. They watched as Gramps calculated, adjusted, and focused, realizing perhaps for the first time that their superiority was not guaranteed. One of them whispered to another, a note of awe in his voice. He knows exactly what he's doing. That shot, it's not just skill, it's experience. We underestimated him. Pride, once loud and mocking, had vanished completely, replaced by silent concern. The tension on the range was almost unbearable. Every observer held their breath as Gramps finalized his adjustments. The target over 1,500 meters away seemed impossibly small, yet he approached it as if it were mere inches from his face. The combination of experience, patience, and subtle Delta Force guidance had prepared him to attempt what few snipers could even imagine. For the first time, even the young German snipers realized that what they were witnessing was something extraordinary. Gramps' finger hovered over the trigger. The rifle rested perfectly, bipod steady on the sand, scope aligned with unerring precision. He felt the rhythm of the desert, the wind, the shimmer, the vibrations, just as he had felt countless environments before. Delta Force, hidden yet vigilant, waited for the exact moment to provide their final subtle guidance. They knew this shot could define the entire demonstration and teach a lesson about experience, patience, and mastery that no technology could replace. The desert seemed to hold its breath with him. The Germans stood frozen, uncertainty replacing arrogance. Observers leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. The world narrowed down to a single steel plate over a mile away, a rifle, and a man whose entire life had prepared him for this exact moment. Gramps exhaled slowly, steadying himself, and silently whispered a prayer to the lessons of his past. The stage was set for a moment that would be remembered long after the desert heat faded from memory. The desert heat bore down, shimmering waves rising from the sand as Gramps settled into position once more. The final target, a steel plate perched atop a distant hill, loomed, over 1,500 meters away, seemingly tiny against the vast expanse. Every muscle in his body was taut, yet relaxed, each movement deliberate and calculated. His Barrett .50 rested firmly on the bipod, scope aligned, finger hovering just above the trigger. He exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of his body sync with the subtle shifts of the desert air. The entire range seemed to hold its breath. The German snipers, once loud and brash, now stood quietly, watching in stunned disbelief. Their arrogance had given way to tension, their confidence replaced by a growing awareness that they had underestimated the old man. One of them whispered to his companion, his voice barely audible, He's not just skilled, he's calculating everything. They had trained their entire lives to measure distance, wind, and trajectory with precision, but they had never seen patience, experience, and instinct combined in this way. Gramps was no ordinary sniper. He was a master. Delta Force operatives, stationed discreetly across the range, maintained silent vigilance. Major Tom Bennett's eyes narrowed as he tracked Gramps' movements. "Watch the wind shift," he whispered, signaling subtly to another operative. Minor adjustments, nearly imperceptible, would be relayed to Gramps without his awareness. The team knew their role was to provide clarity, not intervention. This shot was his skill, honed over decades, would determine the outcome. They were merely the unseen guardians, ensuring that every variable aligned perfectly for the final, legendary moment. Gramps inhaled deeply, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle, the solid connection to the bipod, and the rhythm of the desert around him. Years of experience had taught him that the environment was as much a partner as the weapon itself. He could feel subtle changes in the wind, slight distortions caused by heat shimmer, even the faint vibration of the sand beneath him. Each of these factors could determine whether the bullet found its mark or fell short. With decades of practice, he had learned to anticipate these variables instinctively, but even he respected the margin for error at such extreme distance. The Germans continued to observe silently, unease creeping into their expressions. Technology and training had brought them far, but none had faced an opponent like Gramps. His calm demeanor, the deliberate way he checked his scope, and the meticulous adjustments he made to his rifle were unfamiliar to them. One young sniper glanced at the others, a hint of worry in his eyes. "Do you think he can actually hit it?" The question hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Pride and confidence had crumbled in the face of experience. Gramps' mind raced through calculations, though his expression remained serene. Distance, wind, humidity, temperature, and mirage were all variables he considered, along with the bullet's weight, velocity, and drop. He measured, estimated, and recalculated, ensuring nothing was left to chance. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, the familiar weight of the weapon a comfort. This was the culmination of decades of practice, missions, and mastery, a moment where preparation, patience, and skill intersected perfectly. A subtle gust of wind shifted across the range, barely perceptible to the untrained eye. Delta Force operatives noted it immediately, signaling a minor correction through a prearranged hand gesture. Gramps, attuned to the desert, noticed the subtle change instinctively. Without hesitation, he adjusted his scope and stance, integrating the new variables seamlessly into his calculation. To him, it was second-nature experience guiding every move. The Germans remained oblivious, still struggling to understand how a man of his age could perform such precise mental gymnastics. Time seemed to stretch as Gramps settled into the final alignment. Every observer felt the tension. Even the wind seemed to pause in anticipation. The desert was alive with expectation. The Germans, now silent and respectful, had ceased all motion, their rifles resting idly in their hands. They could see the determination in his eyes, a mastery in every subtle movement. This was no ordinary demonstration. It was a lesson in patience, focus, and the quiet power of experience. Gramps' breathing slowed, each exhale measured and deliberate. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, visualizing the trajectory of the bullet, the arc it would follow, and the way it would meet the distant steel plate. Every calculation had been done mentally. Every factor accounted for. Years of training in extreme conditions, missions where one wrong calculation could cost lives, had honed this instinct to perfection. This was the moment where experience met opportunity, where patience overcame arrogance, and where skill triumphed over doubt. The tension on the range became almost unbearable. Every eye was fixed on Gramps. Even Delta Force operatives, confident in his ability, felt the suspense of the moment. One slight miscalculation, a shift in wind, a slight tremor could ruin the shot. But Gramps was undeterred. His body, mind, and weapon were in perfect harmony. Every detail had been considered. Every adjustment made. He was ready. Finally, he exhaled fully, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat sync with the desert around him. He adjusted his aim one last time, ensuring the scope's crosshairs were perfectly aligned with the distant target. The Germans, now completely silent, could only watch as the old man prepared to make a shot that seemed impossible. Pride had been replaced by anticipation, arrogance by awe. The entire range waited, collectively holding its breath. Gramps whispered a silent acknowledgement to the lessons of his past, memories of missions, training, and discipline filling his mind. He had faced far greater challenges, and yet this moment felt monumental not because of the target itself, but because it represented decades of mastery, distilled into a single opportunity. Patience, calculation, and focus were his allies. Haste, arrogance, and doubt were his enemies. With the steel plate over a mile away, he was prepared to prove that true skill transcends age, technology, and youth. Every movement was deliberate. Every factor accounted for. Gramps' finger hovered above the trigger, ready to release the shot that would define the morning, the range, and the respect of everyone watching. The desert held its breath with him, the heat shimmer distorting the landscape in waves, the faint gusts of wind shifting imperceptibly. The Germans' silence was deafening, Delta Force operatives' focus absolute, and observers leaning forward in rapt attention. The stage was set for a moment that would be remembered long after the desert air cooled. Gramps, calm, collected, and infinitely precise, was about to demonstrate that experience, patience, and mastery could overcome arrogance and technology. One breath, one trigger pull, one shot. The culmination of decades, the focus of a lifetime, the test of a legend. The desert air, once filled with the Germans' mocking laughter, was now heavy with silence. Gramps Matthews remained seated behind his Barrett .50, methodically cleaning the rifle, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. The distant steel plate gleamed faintly, a testament to the perfect shot he had just made. Observers, Delta Force operatives, and even the once arrogant German snipers watched in stunned admiration. The lesson had been clear. Experience, patience, and skill could outmatch youth and technology, and Gramps had proven it beyond doubt. The youngest German sniper, the one who had mocked Gramps the most earlier, approached cautiously. He extended his hand, a mixture of humility and awe in his expression. I misjudged you," he said softly, voice tinged with respect. "I've trained my whole life, yet you've shown me something I could never have imagined." Gramps, without looking up immediately, nodded slowly. His calm demeanor and measured acknowledgement conveyed more than words ever could. Respect, he knew, was earned through action, not boasting. Another German stepped forward, inspecting the target and the flawless trajectory of the bullet. "Your experience. It's unlike anything we faced," he admitted. "Technology can only take you so far. You've demonstrated that patience, calculation, and instinct are far more powerful. The words were heavy with sincerity. The arrogance that had filled the air just hours ago had completely vanished. Gramps had transformed doubt into awe, mockery into reverence. Delta Force operatives, who had quietly observed throughout, began to relax subtly. They had seen remarkable shots before, but the combination of skill, calm, and meticulous preparation displayed by Gramps was extraordinary, even by their exacting standards. Major Tom Bennett approached him discreetly, nodding with quiet approval. "You've not only demonstrated mastery," he said softly, "you've reminded everyone here why experience matters." That shot, that was legendary. Gramps merely smiled faintly, brushing the sand from his hands. For him, recognition was secondary. Mastery was its own reward. Observers began to murmur among themselves, recounting what they had witnessed. Trainers shook their heads in disbelief, whispering in awe of the calm precision, the flawless execution, and the way Gramps had turned the tables on the young snipers. "I've never seen anything like it," one instructor said quietly. "To calculate all variables at once, remain calm under scrutiny, and execute perfectly. That takes a lifetime." Another trainer added, "He's not just a shooter. He's a master strategist, a teacher of patience and precision." These young snipers will remember this day for the rest of their lives. The German snipers, now humbled, began asking questions, not for competition, but for understanding. "How did you account for the wind shift?" one asked. "How did you correct for mirage over such distance?" another inquired. Gramps answered calmly, explaining the fundamentals of observation, patience, and calculation. He spoke of discipline, of respecting the environment, and of relying on experience over technology alone. Each answer was measured, deliberate, and insightful. By the time he finished, even the skeptics were nodding in silent approval. Among the Delta Force team, there was quiet satisfaction. They had observed many shooters, but Gramps had demonstrated something unique: the ability to combine instinct, experience, and calm calculation to achieve perfection under scrutiny. Their subtle guidance had been minimal, yet even they knew that the victory belonged entirely to the old man. Technology, training, and youth were tools, but Gramps' decades of experience were the defining factor. As the Germans reflected, they began to recognize the broader lesson. Humility, respect, and mastery were more valuable than arrogance or reliance on equipment. "We mocked him," one whispered, "but he taught us something we'll never forget. True skill transcends age and technology." Their voices, once loud with derision, were now subdued, tinged with reverence. Gramps had not only earned their respect, he had reshaped their understanding of what it meant to be a master. The local observers and trainers, inspired by the demonstration, began discussing the significance of the moment. Some remarked on the technical brilliance, while others focused on the lesson of experience and patience. "He's a reminder that true mastery takes time," one trainer said. "You can't rush it. Technology can enhance skill, but it cannot replace it." Another added, "This isn't just a demonstration of marksmanship. It's a lesson in life. Patience, observation, and experience. These are what make someone truly exceptional." Gramps, meanwhile, began packing his rifle with care, his movements methodical and calm. He knew the lesson had been delivered. The German snipers had seen firsthand the culmination of decades of discipline, training, and practice. Observers had witnessed the quiet power of mastery, and Delta Force had acknowledged the perfection of the execution. All that remained was for the respect to solidify into lasting admiration. As he walked across the desert toward the edge of the range, the Germans fell into step behind him, no longer mockers, but students of a craft they had never truly understood. "Teach us," one said quietly. "Show us how to develop patience and precision like that." Gramps nodded, recognizing the sincerity in their voices. He had never sought recognition, But if his example could inspire others, it was worth sharing. The crowd, inspired by what they had witnessed, began to murmur words of admiration and awe. Trainers debated the techniques, the calculations, and the timing of the shot. Observers shared the story among themselves, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary. Even casual onlookers, who had arrived out of curiosity, were captivated by the demonstration, drawn into the lesson of patience, focus, and the quiet authority of experience. Delta Force operatives slowly began to pack up, satisfied that the exercise had served its purpose. They had facilitated subtly, ensuring that the environmental conditions were optimal for the final shot. But they knew the true accomplishment belonged to Gramps. His mastery had transcended technology, youth, and arrogance, creating a moment that would be remembered long after the desert sun had set. Gramps paused one final time, glancing over the distant target and then back at the Germans and observers. "Precision," he said quietly, "is not just about the weapon or the target. It's about patience, discipline, and respect for the craft, for the environment, and for yourself. Never underestimate experience. It's earned over a lifetime." The words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply with everyone present. The German snipers nodded, absorbing the lesson with newfound humility. Observers and trainers exchanged glances, recognizing the enduring significance of the demonstration. Delta Force quietly retreated, leaving Gramps to his dignity and the silent acknowledgement of his unparalleled skill. In that moment, the desert became a witness to more than a perfect shot. It had seen the culmination of a lifetime of mastery, the quiet triumph of patience and experience over arrogance and youth. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Every observer, every sniper, every Delta Force operative watched as Gramps adjusted his scope one final time. The steel plate, perched over 1,500 meters away atop the distant hill, appeared impossibly small. Yet in Gramps' vision, it was as clear and steady as a target a few meters away. Years of experience, decades of training, and countless missions had honed his perception to the point where distance mattered little. Only precision, patience, and timing counted. He exhaled slowly, synchronizing his heartbeat with the rhythm of the desert. A faint gust of wind whispered across the sand, altering the air ever so slightly. Gramps noticed the subtle shift instinctively, and his trained mind recalculated the bullet's path instantly. Without hesitation, he adjusted the scope, fine-tuning the trajectory with minute precision. The Germans, unaware of these invisible adjustments, stared in disbelief, sensing only the calm authority of a man completely in command of his craft. Nearby, Delta Force operatives communicated silently, signaling subtle environmental changes with almost imperceptible hand gestures. Major Tom Bennett's eyes remained locked on Gramps, assessing, ready to provide guidance if needed. They had prepared for this moment, yet even they understood that the final shot belonged entirely to the veteran sniper. Every calculation, every adjustment, every moment of waiting had led to this exact point. The target was distant, the conditions harsh, but the outcome depended on nothing but the mastery of the shooter. Gramps' finger rested lightly on the trigger. Time seemed to stretch, each second drawn into an eternity. He recalled countless missions from his past, long-range shots in the snow-covered forests of Europe, desert operations where one miscalculation could cost lives, urban conflicts where precision was paramount. All those experiences converged into the instant he now faced. The wind, the heat, the slight mirage over the distant hill, each factor accounted for. His hands were steady, his mind clear, his resolve absolute. The Germans' confidence had completely evaporated. Their advanced rifles and youthful reflexes could not substitute for the mastery Gramps exhibited. They leaned forward, eyes wide, trying to comprehend how this old man could command such control over a rifle and the environment around him. One young sniper whispered to another, awe creeping into his voice. He's doing something we can't even see. He's calculating everything. How is that possible? Their arrogance had been replaced by a mixture of fear, admiration, and disbelief. Gramps exhaled once more, focusing entirely on the target. He visualized the bullet's path, the arc it would follow, the way it would meet the steel plate with flawless precision. His entire body was still, save for the gentle movement of his finger on the trigger. Delta Force operatives remained poised in the background, ready to provide subtle adjustments if necessary. The old man was unaware of their presence. His focus was absolute. The desert air was heavy with anticipation. Every onlooker felt the tension, the inevitability of something extraordinary about to unfold. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked, recoil absorbed effortlessly by his practiced stance. The bullet soared over the shimmering desert, tracing a path guided by experience, calculation, and instinct. Observers followed its flight with wide eyes. Time seemed to slow. The young German snipers, whose confidence had been unshakable just hours earlier, were frozen in shock. They had never witnessed such calm, such control, and such precision. The bullet arced perfectly, cutting through heat distortion and subtle wind shifts with uncanny accuracy. The impact was immediate. The round struck the center of the distant steel plate with a resonant metallic clang that echoed across the range. The precision was flawless. The impossible had become reality. Observers gasped, some clapping quietly, some staring in disbelief. The Germans, now pale and speechless, could not comprehend what had just occurred. Their laughter, their arrogance, their confidence, all had been shattered by one man's mastery. They approached cautiously, a mixture of fear and awe in their eyes. Gramps lowered his rifle slowly, expression calm, almost serene. He did not smile, nor did he boast. The target had been struck, the demonstration complete. Every detail had been calculated, every variable accounted for. He had proven what experience, patience, and skill could achieve, even against younger, better-equipped adversaries. The German snipers finally understood, perhaps for the first time, the value of mastery that transcended technology and youth. Their respect, unspoken yet palpable, replaced the mockery of earlier moments. Delta Force operatives exchanged subtle nods. They had observed Gramps' methodical process and were aware of the perfection of the shot. Yet they had also witnessed something far greater than mere skill, the quiet confidence and unwavering focus of a man whose life had been devoted to mastery. Technology could aid, but it could not replace decades of experience. That was the lesson that the young snipers would carry long after they left the range. The silence stretched for several moments. Then, one of the Germans, the youngest and most arrogant earlier, stepped forward, bowing his head slightly. I underestimated you," he said quietly, voice tinged with awe. Another nodded, adding, "Your experience, your skill, it is extraordinary." Words could not fully capture the depth of respect they felt, but the sentiment was clear. Gramps, without replying, simply nodded in acknowledgement. No gloating, no celebration, only the quiet dignity of mastery. Observers whispered among themselves, recounting what they had seen. Some marveled at the technical brilliance of the shot, others at the calm, calculated focus of the shooter. Trainers shook their heads, impressed beyond expectation. Even the harshest critics could not deny the perfection of the moment. Gramps had turned mockery into admiration, arrogance into respect, and doubt into awe. He had reminded everyone present that age, experience, and patience could overcome even the most advanced technology and youthful confidence. The German snipers, now humbled, approached Gramps cautiously, studying the rifle, his stance, and his demeanor. They asked questions, not in mockery, but in genuine curiosity. How had he accounted for the mirage? How had he calculated the wind? How could one man, so advanced in years, perform what seemed impossible to younger, highly trained snipers? Gramps answered calmly, sharing lessons of patience, observation, and respect for the craft lessons learned over a lifetime of training and combat. Delta Force operatives quietly melted back into the background, satisfied that the shot had demonstrated not just technical skill, but the enduring power of experience. They had intervened subtly, ensuring conditions were ideal, but the final success belonged entirely to Gramps. The German snipers had been humbled, the observers inspired, and the desert itself seemed to acknowledge the magnitude of the moment. Gramps cleaned his rifle methodically, as though nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Yet in that quiet ritual, he exuded an aura of accomplishment. He had proven, once again, that mastery was not defined by youth, technology, or arrogance, but by patience, discipline, and experience. The Germans had laughed at the old man, but he had shown them the power of decades of training distilled into a single perfect shot. The desert sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the range. The heat shimmered in wavering waves over the sand, but the atmosphere was no longer tense, it was reflective. Gramps Matthews stood with calm dignity, his Barrett .50 carefully packed away. He had demonstrated something far greater than mere marksmanship. He had shown the power of experience, patience, and meticulous preparation. The German snipers, once loud and brash, now followed his lead with quiet respect, listening intently as he shared insights from a lifetime of discipline. Delta Force operatives remained discreet in the background, satisfied that the demonstration had achieved more than they could have expected. They had seen great shooters, but few possessed the combination of precision, calm, and mental fortitude that Gramps displayed. Major Tom Bennett, standing a few meters away, observed the exchange with admiration. "He's not just a sniper," Bennett whispered to a fellow operative. "He's a teacher, a strategist, and a reminder of why experience cannot be rushed or replicated." Even among professionals trained to high levels, Gramps' mastery was undeniable. The German snipers gathered closer, each with questions that went beyond simple shooting technique. "How do you maintain patience under pressure?" one asked. "How do you anticipate changes in conditions before they affect the shot?" another inquired. Gramps smiled faintly, recognizing their curiosity as genuine. He spoke slowly and deliberately, ensuring each lesson was absorbed. "Focus," he said. "Discipline, observation. Every variable matters, but it's patience that allows you to account for them. Haste, arrogance, or over-reliance on technology will always betray you. Learn from experience, respect the craft, and trust your instincts, but never stop refining your skill." The Germans listened, humbled yet inspired. They had entered the range thinking skill could be measured in speed, optics, and youth, but they now realized the truth. Mastery was built over years, forged in patience, practice, and careful attention to detail. They nodded silently, their expressions thoughtful, no longer filled with mockery, but with understanding. What they had witnessed would influence their approach for years to come. Gramps had not merely taken a shot. He had reshaped their perspective. Observers from around the range, including trainers and local enthusiasts, approached to shake his hand or offer words of admiration. Each encounter reinforced the lesson that mastery was earned, not inherited, and that experience could often surpass raw talent. Whispers traveled quickly among the crowd. "Did you see that final shot? He's incredible, calm, precise, flawless. That's a lifetime of skill in action." Even casual onlookers, who had arrived out of curiosity, left with a profound respect for the dedication and discipline required to achieve such perfection. Gramps, however, remained humble. He answered questions carefully, shared insights modestly, and encouraged young shooters to focus on practice, observation, and patience rather than shortcuts. His presence became a living lesson in resilience and mastery. Every anecdote he shared, every demonstration he offered, emphasized that true skill required effort, discipline, and respect for the craft. He had turned a competitive range into a classroom, and the students were eager to learn. Delta Force operatives, having facilitated the demonstration subtly, gathered near Gramps. Bennett approached him quietly. "You've inspired more than just these snipers," he said softly. "You've reminded everyone watching why experience and patience are irreplaceable. Your lesson will be carried far beyond this desert." Gramps nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement yet remaining modest. For him, the reward was in the act itself, the culmination of decades of training and the transmission of knowledge to those willing to listen. As the sun dipped closer to the horizon, the German snipers took turns approaching Gramps individually, expressing their respect and newfound understanding. "I underestimated the value of experience," one said quietly. "You've shown me that mastery takes time, patience, and dedication beyond what I imagined." Another added, "Technology can enhance a shooter, but it can never replace wisdom, foresight, and instinct. I will remember this forever." Each acknowledgement was a testament not just to the shot, but to the enduring power of mentorship, humility, and the quiet authority of someone who had lived a lifetime mastering his craft. Gramps began to pack away the remaining equipment, preparing to leave the range. Observers and snipers alike formed an informal circle, allowing him to exit with dignity. The sun now hung low, casting a golden glow over the sand, turning the desert into a shimmering landscape of shadows and light. The silence was reverent, punctuated only by the occasional murmured reflection on the extraordinary demonstration they had witnessed. Gramps walked slowly, every step deliberate, carrying the weight of decades of experience, yet unburdened by ego. Before departing, he turned to the group one final time. "Remember this," he said, voice steady and clear. "Skill without patience is wasted. Technology without understanding is meaningless. Experience and discipline will carry you further than any shortcut ever could. Respect your craft, respect your environment, and most importantly, respect yourself. The rest will follow." His words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply. The German snipers, Delta Force operatives, trainers, and observers absorbed them, knowing that they had just witnessed the culmination of a life devoted to excellence. The desert, vast and unchanging, seemed to acknowledge the moment. The steel plate on the distant hill now stood as a silent monument to precision, patience, and mastery. What had begun as a demonstration of skill had transformed into a lesson in humility, focus, and the power of experience. The German snipers would leave with a deeper understanding of their craft. Observers would share the story far and wide. And Gramps Matthews, quiet, methodical, and extraordinarily skilled, had once again proven that mastery transcends age, arrogance, and even technology itself. As Gramps walked away from the range, the crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves. Trainers exchanged notes, inspired to integrate lessons from the day into their future programs. The German snipers lingered a moment longer, reflecting silently, their previous arrogance replaced by admiration. Delta Force operatives remained in the background, satisfied that the demonstration had achieved everything it was meant to, and more. Gramps had not just hit a target. He had imparted wisdom, inspired respect, and left an indelible mark on everyone present. By the time Gramps reached the edge of the desert, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. His silhouette was calm, steady, and dignified, a living reminder of what true mastery meant. Experience, patience, and discipline had triumphed. The story of the old man and the distant steel plate would be told for years to come, a tale of quiet authority, precision, and the enduring power of a lifetime devoted to excellence. Gramps paused briefly, looking back at the range one last time. The lessons were complete. Respect had been earned, admiration achieved, and the final shot had spoken louder than any words ever could. The desert would keep its memory, and those who had witnessed it would carry the story forward, an enduring testament to the old man who had transformed arrogance into awe, mockery into respect, and a simple target into a legend.